Alright, good. Glad you can hear this. This is my second video attempt. I accidentally ended the recording. Oh yeah, I'm currently working on the same video. I already have my intro clipped in. Because now I'm starting to work on video editing! Yay! Oh god, this is gonna be a pain. Oh, it's not even hard video editing. It's just simple, just drop and add, clips. And, cutting some parts, if I don't want them. So, there you go. Anyways, I'll be right back. It's not gonna be right back for you. It's gonna be just nothing. Just, yeah. Okay, I'm back. It wasn't, back to you, because, yeah, 19 News. I don't even listen to 19 News. It's my channel. Anyways, you already know what we're doing. You already know what we're doing. We're re-reacting. Well, wait, no. We're re-reacting to the Kismet train collision. I don't feel like voicing it over. So I'm just gonna re-react it. Alright, here we go.
This is the story of two trains traveling an up.
Hold on, let me just pause before we even really get started. I'm gonna make two little announcements. One is I have my little kitty Ken here. I have my little kid. He's my cute little kitty. His name's Ken. He's the one that ran away for a bit. And then came back late at night. Also, I want some break. Did I already tell you that? I don't know. I have ADHD. Well, actually, I have ADD, but let's just not get into that, alright? And then secondly, I do not condone any drug or alcohol use. I mean, obviously, yes, if it's medical drugs, yeah. But, if it's unauthorized medical drug, no. I just, no. Just no. And if I have to say this, then it's bad, man. It's bad. Which it is, honestly. If I have to say this, it's bad. It's bad. Anyways, let's continue.
Opposite directions on the same line. One makes a drastic error, and it was all caught on camera. This is the story of the Kismet train collision. On the morning of June 14th, 2006, two BNSF freight trains were traveling along the Stockton subdivision through California's Central Valley. The southbound train was a manifest, designated MRIC BAR 1-13. The train consisted of 55 freight cars and 7 locomotives on the head end. Leading the train was BNSF-944CW 4059, followed by National Railway Equipment or NREX ST50 number 5473, another BNSF-9 1065, a First Union Rail or FURX ST40-2 8110, BNSF GP30U 2437, BNSF ST40-2 7065, and finally BNSF-9 997. In the opposite direction was a northbound unit train carrying cement. This train consisted of 30 freight cars and 4 locomotives, all of which were -9s. Leading the train was BNSF 4479, followed by BNSF 4715, Norfolk Southern 8967, and lastly BNSF 4576. As mentioned earlier, the two trains were traveling along the Stockton subdivision, which runs between Richmond and Colway Yard just south of Fresno. The line is primarily single track, with a number of passing sidings along the way, to ensure that trains traveling in opposite directions can safely pass each other. In the case of these two trains, they would be using the siding at Kismet, in which 4059 would stop on the main line just before the switch, allowing 4479 to divert into the siding and safely pass 4059, thus allowing the two trains to pass each other without incident. A surveillance camera in the cab of 4479 shows what happens next. At the start of the video, the train can be seen passing a yellow over yellow signal, meaning to be prepared to divert off the main line at a restricted speed. Not long afterwards, the train passes the Amtrak station at Madera, California. Then it rounds a wide bend, and the siding at Kismet comes into view. At the same time, the light of 4059 does as well. However, at the time the two trains come into each other's sight, both realize the danger that is lurking, and both trains are thrown into emergency. The crews either brace for impact or jump from the locomotives, and the green light at the east end of the siding changes to red, indicating that 4059 has entered the block. And at 5:51 a.m., it happens. The two trains collide head-on at a combined speed of 60 miles per hour. The impact derails 3 of the locomotives and 2 freight cars from the southbound train, one of which smashes through the cab of the last unit. As for the opposing train, all 4 locomotives and 14 cars come off the track. Amazingly, despite all of the damage sustained, all 5 crew members from each train survived, having either rode out the impact or jumping seconds before. But now the question is, what could have caused such a freak accident to happen in the first place? An investigation by the Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, was soon launched. During drug testing of the southbound crew, they found traces of crack cocaine in the conductor's system, which is a drug that can impair your vision and make operating machinery such as a
Once again, I just want to make it clear, I just do not condone any of this at all. I do not condone drugs, alcohol of any kind, especially alcohol. I mean, especially alcohol, honestly. Right? I mean, alcohol is bad in general. Well, I guess it could be used for some things, but I just don't condone drinking alcohol and becoming drunk. I mean, yes. I mean, yeah, as long as you don't get drunk, it's kind of okay. But it's just, no. Just no.
locomotive very dangerous. In addition, during interviews with all 3 crew members, which included the engineer, conductor, and brakeman, they stated that either the signal at East Kismet kept changing from red to green, or that sunlight was making the signal unreadable. However, both statements were proven false, as a test train was sent out a week after the crash, and it indicated that all signals were working as they should have been. The train should have stopped at the red signal at East Kismet. The same test train and astronomical reports also found that the sun would have first come into view at 5:53 a.m., 2 minutes after the collision occurred. The FRA also ruled out any mechanical problems with the trains, so therefore the blame went solely to the crew of 4059 for not reacting to the signals properly and stopping their train. Whether the cocaine in the conductor's system contributed was never determined. As for the locomotives involved, all but one made it out. 8110 was eventually sold off to Webb Asset Management and currently operates at the Kansas and Oklahoma Railroad. 2437 went back to BNSF, but in later years was sold to Larry Struck and Electronic, and in 2020 was put in storage in Galveston, Texas. As of early 2022, the locomotive has been moved out of storage and is somewhere in the Midwest. If anyone knows its current whereabouts, please let me know. 7065 also returned to BNSF, but in later years was sold to Helm Leasing and eventually to Norfolk Southern, where it currently runs as number 3517. 4576 was repaired and repainted into its Heritage 2 colors. However, the biggest difference is the different font on the number below the cab. 997, despite having a freight car go through its cab, was also repaired and repainted into its original Heritage 1, with again the biggest difference being the different font on the number. 4059 was amazingly repaired and repainted into its original colors. 4479 was also repaired despite the damage it sustained, however it was repainted into BNSF Heritage 3 colors, as were 1065 and 4715. 8967 was also repaired. However, in 2019, the locomotive went into Norfolk Southern's rebuild program and was converted into an AC-44 C6M and was renumbered to 4208. This means that the only locomotive that was not repaired was NREX 5473, which was deemed a total loss and eventually scrapped. It's been 16 years since this crash, and even since then it has been speculated that positive train control, had it been installed, could have prevented this crash. However, we cannot always rely on technology to do everything for us. We must always ensure that we keep doing our part in making sure that we know what is going on to ensure that something like this never happens again.
You know what? I just want to take in note here that, honestly, this could go into something else that I really like. Ever heard of it? It's called, I don't know, Unstoppable? I'm not really sure if anyone's ever heard of it. Maybe? No? Yeah, do we, should have tied the air brakes. That's my part on this. Should have just tied the air brakes. Anyways, but on the actual Kismet train collision, yeah, just no. Yeah. You know what? I guess we can react to one more thing, because I do have whatever, another thing, another, whatever, yeah, yep. I forget what it's called. Not this.
Channel memberships.
I know it's from Thunderbolt, but not, what? I swear I just saw AWVR. I guess not. Did I? I don't know. The Lac Megantic. That's right.
Quickly realized it was.
Yes, I already started this. I've watched the entire thing already. So it's another reaction, even though, well, yeah.
On July 6th, 2013, one of the darkest days of 21st century railroading occurred.
Well, wait a minute. Hold on. If this is a reaction, because I've already watched it, but I haven't uploaded it, then that would make the Kismet train collision a I'm kidding. I'm not counting it as a reaction. Because I haven't actually reacted to it yet, basically. Because I haven't posted it, nor have I even video recorded it. So anyways, let's continue.
In the small town of Lac Megantic, located in the eastern region of Quebec, Canada, on a lake of the same name. The accident highlighted many issues, from negligence to unsafe business practices, that led to this disaster. And believe it or not, this accident, while somewhat forgotten today, was more crucial than most would ever think.
Oui, t'inquiète pas pour moi, ok? Oh mon Dieu! Oh mon Dieu! Oh my God! Oh my God!
So this video is about to be an hour long.
Before we talk about the accident, we need to dive into the history of the railroad involved and the line in question that runs through Lac Megantic. The rail line was built in the 1880s as part of the Canadian Pacific's final link in their transcontinental system between Montreal and Saint John, New Brunswick, with the section east of Lac Megantic known as the International Railway of Maine. The line saw both freight and passenger trains, including Canadian Pacific's Atlantic Limited,
Alright.
later known as Via Rail's Atlantic, which ran 3 times a week from Montreal in Quebec to Halifax, Nova Scotia, until being cancelled for good on December 16, 1994. The rail line was owned and operated by Canadian Pacific until being sold in segments in January of 1995. The eastern half of the line between Brownville Junction and St. John was sold to J.D. Ivering, which established 2 subsidiaries, the Eastern Main Railway and the New Brunswick Southern Railway. The western half of the line between Brownville Junction toward Montreal was sold to Iron Road Railways, or IRR, a US-based company which established a subsidiary called the Canadian American Railroad. IRR filed for bankruptcy for its subsidiary in the fall of 2002. The main line from Saint Jean de Richelieu to Brownville Junction was sold to Railworld Incorporated, and in January 2003, Railworld formed the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway, or MMA for short, as a subsidiary who operated the tracks and engaged in aggressive cost-cutting for their freight operations and started to defer in maintenance of all categories almost since day one, much like Penn Central did when they first merged in 1968. One of the cost-cutting measures even included one-man train crews, where the only man on the train is the engineer. There's no conductors nor brakemen. We'll get back to that pretty soon. Their fleet contained a handful of old EMDs like GP7s, a GP9, and even a handful of SD40-2s, sometimes even borrowing some from leasing companies. But the majority of the fleet consisted of older General Electric units in varying conditions, like ex-Santa Fe B23-7s, ex-Burlington Northern C30-7s, and a lot of B39-8Es, with only 2 receiving an official MMA livery. Right from the get-go, things started to go wrong for MMA, with 2 of the railway's largest customers, a pair of Great Northern paper mills in Millinocket and East Millinocket, declared bankruptcy and shut down. Despite layoffs and cost-cutting, accidents were a common occurrence and businesses were shutting down or turning toward trucking for their shipping needs. But a sign of hope came in 2012. The company's fortunes began to change for the better when MMA embraced oil-by-rail contracts as a path to profitability. Transporting oil allowed them to rehire laid-off workers and even purchase more locomotives, in the form of 3 ex-Conrail C39-8s from the Pennsylvania Northeastern based out of Lansdale, Pennsylvania.
Oh.
The oil being transported over MMA was destined for St. John, New Brunswick's Ivering Oil Refinery. By early 2013, environmental groups and Maine state officials did express concerns about the increasing amount of crude oil on both the MMA and its rival Pan Am railways in the wake of a string of minor derailments on both railroads. However, in a March 2013 Associated Press interview, MMA's chief executive, Robert Grinrod, dismissed these concerns, stating, "The statistics tell you how much has been transported, but to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been any spilled or released." Little did Robert know that he spoke a little too soon.
Oh god. I already know what's gonna happen, but
On the night of July 5th, 2013, train MMA-2, a loaded unit crude oil train, arrives at Nantes, Quebec, on its way from Newtown, North Dakota to the Ivering Oil Refinery in St. John, New Brunswick. Shipping of the oil was contracted to Canadian Pacific, which transported it on CP tracks from North Dakota to the CP yard in Côte de Salut, a Montreal suburb. CP...
I'm already just gonna point this out. There's like a little dam here, and then the rest of the track is like... I wonder why that is. I'm just gonna point that out. I actually never noticed that. I'm just gonna point that out. Really? Spoilers! Why?
He subcontracted MMA to transport the oil from Côte de Salut to the MMA yard in Brownville Junction. After that, MMA would hand the car to the New Brunswick Southern Railway, who would transport it to the final destination at the St. John refinery. The train was being operated solely by 52-year-old engineer Thomas Harding. It consisted of 5 locomotives, 3 of them being MMA owned, with 2 being from leasing companies. Leading the train was MMA C30-7 number 5017, a former Burlington Northern unit. Following it was a remote control caboose that housed the locotrol equipment necessary for MMA single engineer train operations that allows the engines to be controlled remotely for things like yard switching. MMA 5026, another former BN C30-7, follows behind, with CITX SD40-2 3053, former Canadian Pacific 5740, right behind. The last 2 locomotives were MMA 5023, yet another ex-BN C30-7, and finally CEFX SD40-2 number 3166, a former Union Pacific number 3360. As for rolling stock, the train had 1 boxcar being used as a buffer car to adapt the slightly different knuckle couplings between the tank cars and the locomotives, which was hooked up to 72.111 tank cars, all fully loaded with crude oil. Each tanker houses over 113,000 liters of oil, so that's over 8,136,000 liters total. This made the train 4,701 feet long and weighing over 10,287 metric tons. The train was being parked for the night for a recrew the next morning. However, the train was to be tied down on the main line tonight, as the siding adjacent to the main line was occupied by other freight cars, usually empty boxcars in storage for Tafisa, a particle board factory in Lac Megantic's industrial park, which was a routine practice by MMA to keep them there. This practice back then was abnormal, not being seen on a routine basis on other railroads, including the bigger Class 1s, but it was somewhat routine on MMA, and there were no regulations to prevent such a thing, especially since the mainline track lacked a derail that could force a train off the track should it run away down the grade, which is something the siding track did have. Once the train stopped and the air brakes were applied, all the locomotives were shut down, with the exception of 5017, which would be left on to keep the air pressure throughout the train and keep the brakes on. He then applied the handbrakes on all 5 locomotives, the buffer car, and caboose, and then attempted a brake test to see if the handbrakes alone could hold the train. But he incorrectly left the locomotive's air brakes on during the test, so this gave the engineer the false impression that the handbrakes alone could hold the train on the grade, when in reality he needed much more handbrakes to be applied. The engineer contacted the dispatcher in Farnham to advise that the train was tied down. Next, he contacted the dispatcher in Bangor, Maine, to report that the lead locomotive, 5017, had a lot of issues throughout the trip, and that lots of black and white smoke was coming out of the exhaust stack. This would play a very crucial part in the accident for the next few minutes. Expecting the smoke to settle, they both agreed to deal with the situation the following morning. MMA's operating plan was to leave the train parked on the main line, unattended, with an unlocked locomotive cab, along a public highway where it was accessible to the general public, with no additional protection, not even a derail. However, there were no rules against leaving a train unlocked, running unattended, even if it contained dangerous materials and was stopped on the main line on a slope in the vicinity of a residential area. This was because normally when locomotives are tied down, the throttle is put into neutral, and often the reverser and brake handles are removed, so a group of hooligans or whatever couldn't put the train into gear, release the brakes, and let it roll. Of course, that is if the correct number of handbrakes were applied too. After finishing his work, Harding departed by taxi for a local hotel for the night. En route, the engineer told the taxi driver he felt a little bit uneasy about leaving his train with the leader running while it was spitting oil and thick black smoke out the exhaust. He said he wanted to call the US office of MMA in Hemron, Maine, as they would be able to give him more directives on what to do about it. The taxi's driver, Andre Takade, described the engineer as being covered in droplets of oil, which also covered the taxi's windscreen as it was waiting to pick him up. While being covered in oil or soot is not unheard of for train crewmen, in this case, something wasn't right. Witnesses recalled seeing the train seemingly unattended and in a bad state around 22:45 that night. People driving on the road that parallels the rail line near Nantes recalled having to slow down as they passed the train because of the thick, dark blue cloud of smoke being emitted, as well as the sparks coming from the locomotive's exhaust due to a broken piston in the prime mover. According to the Transportation Safety Board, MMA's dispatcher was warned of the train having issues at the time, but he decided to do nothing about it. Then, all of a sudden, the Nantes Fire Department, as well as a police officer from Lac Megantic, responded to a 911 call. Somebody had reported a fire on the 5017, the lead locomotive.
That I worked it hard coming up there. She was smoking pretty good when I left her.
Okay.
Now you're telling me she caught on fire?
Yeah, she got on fire.
Okay, is somebody up there to take care of it? Or?
Yeah, well, the firemen, the firefighter were there.
Yes.
And apparently it's dead now.
According to the fire chief, Patrick Lambert, we shut down the engine before fighting the fire. Our protocol calls for us to shut down the engine because it is the only way to stop fuel from circulating into the fire. The fire department extinguished the small fire and notified the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway's dispatcher in Farnham about what had happened. Strangely though, MMA didn't grant permission to the engineer to return to the scene. Instead, they summoned a track maintenance foreman who was unfamiliar with the operation of air brakes. A baffling decision. By 0:13 the next morning on July 6, 2013, 2 MMA track maintenance employees arrived. The firefighters left the scene shortly thereafter, and the MMA employees confirmed to the police officer and to the Farnham dispatcher that the train was indeed safe again. But it wasn't safe. In fact, the fire had already set the events of the accident in motion. Once the 5017 was shut down, air wasn't being cycled through the train. The main air reservoirs were slowly being depleted, and at 0:56, the air pressure had dropped so much that the air brakes and handbrakes couldn't hold the train any longer, and it very slowly began to roll down the 1.2% grade toward Lac Megantic, just 7 miles away. A witness recalled watching the train moving slowly without the locomotive's headlights on, nor hearing the prime movers of the locomotives. Even someone with no knowledge of trains would know something was wrong. The track was also not equipped with track circuits to alert the dispatcher of a runaway train. While this was going on, firefighter Jean-Luc Montamy was heading home after helping put out the fire on the 5017. He was stopped at the Quebec Route 161 crossing, located just southeast of where the train began to roll. He stated that the crossing had activated and was warning of an oncoming train, but after waiting for some time, he heard no horn nor saw any trains coming. Thinking it was a malfunction, he proceeded over the crossing, a very reckless move. And just as he finished crossing, the train came thundering by behind him with no lights nor horn as it passed through at high speed. If he had crossed a second later, he would have been hit by the runaway. He then quickly realized it was the same train he had responded to just hours earlier. Not wasting any time, he quickly drove down to Nantes to raise the alarm of the emergency that was unfolding. Gathering more and more speed on the long downhill slope, the train soon entered the town of Lac Megantic at over 65 miles an hour, more than 6 times over the speed limit. Witnesses recalled watching the train passing through downtown at a crossing at high speed with no lights, an infernal noise, and sparks being emitted from the wheels. This was the handbrakes grinding away as the weight of the tank cars and downhill grade overwhelmed them. It was also stated by witnesses that since the train was going so fast, the crossing's lights or bells didn't even activate for it. The rail line in this area is also on a curve and has a speed limit of only 10 miles an hour, as it is located at the west end of the Megantic rail yard, where trains must proceed at slow speed. What happened next was inevitable. The buffer car and 65 tanker cars jumped the track right in the center of town near the Route 161 crossing at Frontenac Street. The impact breaches several of the tanker cars open, causing about 6 million liters of crude oil to spill out and ignite. People on the terrace at the Music Cafe, a bar located next to the center of the derailment site, saw the tankers derail and fled for their lives, as a blanket of oil generated a ball of fire 3 times the height of the downtown buildings in what was described as a tsunami of fire. Between 4 and 6 explosions were reported initially as the tank cars ruptured and crude oil escaped along the train's trajectory. Heat from the fires was felt as far as 2 kilometers away. The glow of the fire was so intense.
Hold on. A mile away. Ooh. Wow. Okay. It's got a it's gonna, because my little recording thing is up here. I couldn't reach it.
It could even be seen from space, as seen by this infrared image taken by NASA's Sumui NPP satellite. People had to jump from the 3rd floor of buildings in the central business district to escape the fire. As the blazing oil flowed over the ground, it entered the town's storm sewer system and emerged as huge fires towering from over storm sewer drains, manholes, and even chimneys and basements of buildings in the area. 150 firefighters were dispatched to the scene, describing it as looking like a war zone. Some were called from as far away as the city of Sherbrooke, Quebec, with as many as 8 trucks carrying 30 people being dispatched from Franklin County, Maine, in the United States. The engineer of MMA2 had no idea what the hell was going on, but was sure his train was still parked at the top of the hill at Nantes.
Yard is gone. Flames, RJ, are 200 feet high. It's incredible. You can't believe it here. From the river right to the station.
What the happened?
I don't know.
But soon he was given the chilling news.
It's more than that, my friend. Why? It's your train that rolled down? No. Yes, sir. No, RJ. Yes, sir. Holy yes, sir. That's what I got. It was confirmed at 2:30. 2:30 that the fuel train rolled down here. Yeah. Oh, tabarnak. And it was secure, RJ, when I left.
The local hospital went into code orange, anticipating a high number of casualties and requesting reinforcements from other nearby medical centers. But at first, they received no seriously injured patients. A Canadian Red Cross volunteer said that there had to be no wounded, they all had to be dead. One off-duty music cafe cook was on the terrace at the time of the derailment and was treated for second-degree burns to one of his arms. About 1,000 people were evacuated initially after the derailment, explosion, and fires, with another 1,000 being evacuated later during the day because of toxic fumes from the smoke. Some took refuge in an emergency shelter established by the Red Cross in a local high school. In a heroic effort, 2 employees of Tafisa, a firefighter, and even the MMA engineer himself, Tom Harding, upon realizing that it was his train, as well as a member of the family-owned excavation company, La Fortiniere and Son, had worked to move 9 tank cars away from the fire, ones that didn't derail. Tafisa, a local particle board industry that moves much of its product by rail, did have a rail car mover which had the capacity to deactivate the brakes on the cars in tow. They used the rail car mover to move the first 5 tank cars away from the fire. When they couldn't find a crossing to move the rail car mover back to the disaster site, they instead used a loader to remove another 4 tank cars, 2 at a time. But because the loader lacked equipment to deactivate the brakes, Harding then told the men to just use the loader to brake the air lines and release the air brakes on each of these 4 cars. The fire would burn for another 2 days straight until it was finally extinguished, but the damage was done. In all, 47 people were killed, most of them in the nearby cafe. 5 bodies were never recovered. Most bodies were badly charred, requiring DNA samples of those missing, as well as dental records for identification. It's very likely some of the bodies were literally vaporized in the explosions. At least 30 buildings were destroyed in the center of town, including the town's library, a historic former bank, and other businesses and homes in the area. In total, 115 businesses were destroyed, displaced, or rendered as uninhabitable. The music cafe was among the destroyed buildings, and 3 of its employees were among the dead or missing. Over the next few days, people were slowly allowed to return to their homes, but at least 20 had no home to return to. Colette Roy-LaRoche, the mayor of Lac Megantic, stated,
"We will rebuild our town, but at the same time, we have to accept that it won't be the one we knew. Very old buildings, heritage, and architecture all disappeared, and at the beginning, no one realized the magnitude, and now we are starting to understand the consequences."
As for the locomotives and caboose, they rolled over a half-mile away from the crash site, but stayed on the rails, not suffering any damage. Canada's Transportation Safety Board, or TSB for short, launched an investigation into the cause of the accident and found multiple shocking findings. MMA first claimed that the lead locomotive, 5017, was tampered with after Harding had left, since the locomotive was shut down, thereby disabling the compressor powering the air brakes, which allowed the train to roll downhill into Lac Megantic. This was quite obviously false, as it was only shut down by firefighters after an oil fire started on the 5017. But why didn't the handbrakes hold the train? The simple truth was, not enough were applied. Only 7 handbrakes were set. A minimum of 9 was required, and experts say 15 should have been applied in order to hold the train on a grade, even if the locomotive was shut down for whatever reason. As for the air brakes on the train, they are supplied with an air compressor on each locomotive. When a locomotive is shut off, preferably the leader, the compressor can no longer supply air to the brake system. Brake pipes are all connected to each car and the locomotives. When air leaks naturally from the various components, the pressure will obviously drop. If the system is not recirculated with air, the locomotive's air brakes become basically useless. This was something that the track foreman that was set to supervise the train after the fire didn't know about. Had the engineer been allowed to return back to the scene, he very likely could have just fired up one of the other locomotives to keep the air pressure throughout the train. Why he chose 5017 of all locomotives to keep on that night, no one knows, but it's very likely because it was the leader of the consist anyway. However, when the air brake control valves sense a drop in pressure in the brake pipe, usually below 20%, they are designed to slam on in an emergency application for each car. However, in this case, if the rate of leakage was very slow and steady, the automatic brakes won't be applied, as such an event normally happens with stronger leaks the separation of an air hose, or in the case of a coupling failure from broken couplings or even a derailment. However, it is normal for an engineer parking a train that once the train is stopped, he would apply the brakes on the cars in the train by releasing air from the train line, and then allowing the air in the car's reservoirs to apply the car's brakes. Therefore, if the air was isolated, it wouldn't matter if the brakes applied themselves or not, as they'd already be in the applied position. The train did have locomotives that could automatically restart the air brake system in the event of a brake failure, provided that these locomotives were not shut down, of course. Also, the TSB found that the reset safety control on the lead locomotive was not wired to set the train's brakes on in the event of an engine failure, rendering it pretty much useless. The train could have had a stabilization test performed, but we're going to get to that very soon. As for the locomotives involved, remember how the engineers said the 5017 was having issues? Well, its problems began more than 8 months before the accident. In October of 2012, 5017 was sent to the MMA's repair shops following an engine failure. Because of the time and cost for a standard repair, the fact that finding parts for older General Electric models is rather difficult, not to mention costly, and the pressure to return to the locomotive to service as soon as possible, the engine, instead of receiving a professional repair or being sent to someone that could fix it, they instead performed a very temporary, improper repair by using an epoxy-like material that lacked the required strength and durability of the conditions the locomotive ran in. Unsurprisingly, this quickly failed while in service, leading to issues such as engine surges and excessive black and white smoke out the exhaust. Eventually, the oil pump failed, and oil began to accumulate in the body of the turbocharger, where it overheated, broke a piston, and eventually caught fire on the night of the derailment. While turbocharger issues are not uncommon on General Electric models, such as the C30-7, this kind of mechanical fault was just caused by pure ignorance, instead of the locomotive just aging on its own. To make matters worse, the TSB examined the operations on MMA, and they were horrified at how unsafe their daily routines were, and this could be traced all the way to their very beginning. The Great Recession of 2008 really took its toll on the pulp and paper industry as well as the lumber industry, which originally represented 60% of the railway's daily traffic. MMA was forced to lay off 275 employees and cut salaries by over 40%. They also had to sell off certain routes. In the spring of 2010, they made the most baffling decision to cut train crews from 2 crew members, which were an engineer and conductor, to 1, just the engineer. They also installed remote control systems, such as the one in the caboose at the time, and once again cut the total workforce to 175 people, down from twice that number in 2006. These steps were estimated to save $4.5 million annually in wages and was really the only reason they laid people off, but one-man crews are both dangerous and not really suitable for railroading. Going back to the air brake system one more time, had the train consisted of a 2-man crew, they would have been able to perform a stabilization test by releasing all the air brakes and ensuring just the handbrakes could hold the train, with the conductor being the engineer's extra set of eyes outside. Since there was only a 1-man train crew, this test was not possible. There are hundreds of other reasons why single-man train crews are a danger, such as making it easier for vandals to sabotage and commandeer the train and make it a runaway, the ability to perform roll-bys to detect issues, the chance the engineer can get distracted, and many, many more. There's a link down below to an article if you're interested. MMA also had a very high rate of accidents, mainly due to bad track, and frequent cost-cutting measures meant proper track maintenance couldn't take place, much like Penn Central's operations in the early 1970s. According to data from the Federal Railroad Administration, in the previous years, the railroad had over 36.1 accidents per million miles traveled.
What is .1 supposed to mean? Can someone tell me what .1 is supposed to mean? 36.1. What is this? What is 36.1 supposed to mean? Half an act? Well, no, it's gonna be 0.5. I just.
In comparison to the national average of 14.6 accidents. And these could be either minor accidents, such as involving one car or locomotive, to bigger pileups, and this accident was certainly the worst of them all. Railworld's president and CEO Edward Burkhardt did visit the town on July 10, 2013, where he was harassed by furious locals. Burkhardt's historical involvement with the Waiawega derailment of 1996 on the Wisconsin Central, in which hazardous materials burned for over 2 weeks, also drew renewed scrutiny on such shipments. Raymond Lafontaine, a local contractor who lost a son, 2 daughters-in-law, and an employee in the accident, raised concerns about the poor condition of MMA-owned track and about the increasing quantity of dangerous goods being transported through the downtown area, not only in Lac Megantic, but in cities such as Sherbrooke. He asked that the tracks could either be repaired and likely rerouted to bypass the downtown area, but the requests fell on deaf ears. The Lac Megantic mayor, Colette Roy-LaRoche, sought assistance from federal and provincial governments to move the trains away from downtown. A proposal was made all the way back in the 1970s by Canadian Pacific to reroute the line to bypass downtown Lac Megantic, but this was never implemented because of cost. Now you would think a Class II railroad like MMA with a high accident rate will be kept under a watchful eye by the Safety Bureau Transport Canada, right? Well, despite being labeled with an elevated risk that required frequent inspections of operations, they failed to address the safety concerns, and when they did, MMA would follow up on them, but the old habits would tend to resurface quite often, and Transport Canada often failed to follow up to ensure the recurring issues were analyzed and fixed, nor did the office pick up on MMA's safety plan until 2010. Finally, the attention shifted to the DOT 111 tank cars. During a number of accident investigations over the years, the National Transportation Safety Board from the United States, or NTSB for short, had noted that the DOT 111 tank cars had a high incident rate of breaching open during accidents. Previous investigation had identified the poor performance of DOT 111 tank cars in collisions and derailments, including a May 1991 safety study, as well as investigations of other accidents. On June 30th, 1992, a Burlington Northern train derailed in Superior, Wisconsin, releasing liquefied petroleum gas and chemicals like benzene. In February 9th, 2003, a Canadian National train carrying chemicals like hydrochloric acid derailed in Tamora, Illinois, containing DOT 111 tank cars. 3 years later on October 20th, 2006, a Norfolk Southern ethanol unit train derailed in New Brighton, Pennsylvania. And finally, on February 6, 2011, another Norfolk Southern ethanol train derailed in Arcadia in Ohio. In all these cases, the DOT 111 tanker cars, with some of them dating back to as far as 1967, broke open in the crashes and either released chemicals or started fires. As a result of them and this accident, it was clear a sturdier tank car type was going to be necessary.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Unlike a lot of flammable liquids, crude oil generally can't readily ignite by itself, so many theories came up as to what ignited the oil. These theories included that the oil could have contained additives to speed up the transfer in and out of the tank. This is common when shipping via pipelines, but very rare in shipping by rail. Other theories included the contamination from previous shipments, or that a local propane tank exploded when being struck by one of the tank cars. Higher than average temperatures in the Quebec regions was also a contributing factor, but the most plausible thought is a spark from the ensuing derailment hitting one of the tanker cars caused the fire. As while crude oil has a very thick, viscous appearance, it contains plenty of short-chained hydrocarbons that are distilled out at the refinery. The headspace in these cars ultimately fills up with these flammable vapors just like a tank of gasoline. And so these vapors are ready to ignite with a combustion source, and the resulting heat from the fire can increase how volatile the oil can be, releasing more and more vapors to feed the fire. As the fire builds up, temperature increases, reaching the flash points of longer hydrocarbon chains, and eventually all of it gets hot enough to burn. This also tends to cook off some of the intact tanker cars that didn't breach open, causing them to suffer BLEVs, or boiling liquid expanding vapor explosions, which is where a flammable liquid inside a pressurized tank reaches a temperature beyond its boiling point, and most BLEVs tend to be violent in nature, as seen in accidents like Waiawega and Murdoch, Illinois. The Transportation Safety Board released its final report in August 2014, identifying 18 different causes and contributing factors, but the main ones were the poor condition of locomotive 5017, not enough handbrakes being set on the incline, MMA's negligent business practices, and finally Transport Canada not ensuring that safe operations were present on MMA. As a result of the accident, on May 12, 2014, the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway was charged with 47 counts of criminal negligence. Also, engineer Thomas Harding, manager of train operations Jean Demetier, and dispatcher Richard Labriere were all arrested and charged with 47 counts of criminal negligence causing death. All three would be acquitted on January 19, 2018, to the shock of many, but some locals will agree that it wasn't 100% their fault. They weren't killers. They didn't maliciously make the train run away. However, that doesn't mean they were fully cleared from any responsibility for the accident. MMA very quickly made changes to their operations, such as bringing back two-man crews and increasing enforcement of safety guidelines. They also fired Thomas Harding, but all these changes came too little, too late, as the company filed for bankruptcy in 2014, as, unsurprisingly, the accident permanently ruined their reputation, not to mention that the accident killed their oil contract. MMA's assets were sold at auction to Railroad Acquisition Holdings, a subsidiary of Fortress Investment Group, on January 21st, 2014. The company did form a new railroad named the Central Maine and Quebec Railway to operate the former MMA lines, but the CM&Q was quickly acquired by the Canadian Pacific in June of 2020, meaning the rails were back in the hands of the railroad that built the line in the first place. As for the locomotives, 5017 was held as evidence for the trials and was almost sold off as part of the auction, but the sale was blocked by local police. She was put into storage until finally being scrapped sometime after 2020. 5026 and 5023 were both sent to LTEX in McDonald, Ohio, and were likely scrapped, as no further documentation exists on either locomotive. As for the two SD40-2s, well, CITX 3053 appears to be still in service, last being spotted as of 2019 in Clarington, Ohio. CEFX 3166 is also still with us. It was sold to MVPX in 2018 and was last seen operating at Sweetwater, Texas as of February 2022. The caboose involved in the accident, VB1, was eventually sold to the Black River and Western Railroad of Flemington, New Jersey, renumbered to 596, and can be sometimes seen on their excursion trains. The remote control equipment inside, though, has since been removed. The accident would lead to the development of the new DOT 117 tank cars, which boast more upgrades over the 111s, such as better thermal protection, thicker tank shells, and head shields. They were set to roll out in 2015, with many DOT 111s being rebuilt into DOT 111As as well for better protection. The FRA also stated that DOT 111 cars would be banned in service in a series of cutoff dates, with all cars to be out of service or rebuilt by May 1st, 2025, depending on how volatile the cargo is. Much of downtown Lac Megantic was rebuilt over the years, and the rails are still in place used by Canadian Pacific. But if you look hard enough, you will likely still see scars, since quite a few of the buildings were historical and couldn't be replaced. A memorial was erected at the site the train jumped the track. However, 9 years later, as much as it pains me to say it, but it seems the lessons of Lac Megantic have been forgotten. Class 1 railroads, namely Norfolk Southern and CSX, have been looking toward one-man crews, with their main excuse being that modern systems such as positive train control could eliminate the need for a second crew member, as the computers can do all the work that the conductors used to do, and in terms of working rail yards. Very little evidence can really justify if this is true though, as too many questions remain. How can the engineer see what's going on with the train behind him, like when he's working yards? Who will be having to throw the switches at yards and sidings, since switches are mainly manual, with automatic dispatcher controlled ones being on crossovers and junctions on the main line? Would the engineer lose a second pair of eyes during roll-bys if a defect detector wasn't working or if it issued a defect? The lone crew member would also not only have to operate the locomotive, but he'd also have to do all the talking on the radio, not just with the dispatcher, but with signal maintainers, gang foremen, other train crews, etc. The single operator would also be responsible for properly giving a visual lookover or roll-by to other trains that are met and passed, which requires one of the trains to be stopped while the other one, well, rolls by. And the single crew member would also have to be responsible for all the paperwork, including the train's manifest and the position of all the hazardous materials or sensitive loads on the train. Currently, these duties still fall onto the conductor, thereby alleviating the engineer from multi-layer distractions, work overload that can cause the engineer to take his attention away from the immediate task at hand, running the train from point A to point B. The mentoring aspect between conductor and engineer would also be lost, as conductors have to train hours upon hours on the job with brake systems, signal aspects, and more before they can even be trusted behind the throttle and be promoted to engineer. There's also plenty of distractions that can cause an engineer to miss something, or the engineer wouldn't even be able to do basic things like trying to run the train while needing to either get himself a drink, needing to go to the restroom, etc. There's many more problems that can be listed, but if I listed them all, we'd be here all day. The point is, unlike a subway, bus, or even a semi, trains can't run with just one crew member. Even passenger trains need a conductor and of course trainmen to collect tickets. Bottom line is, if it didn't work out for MMA, it certainly wouldn't work for all of America's railroads. Trains have gotten longer and heavier thanks to precision scheduled railroading, combining medium to large trains of 80 to 120 cars into 200 to nearly 300 cars long, sometimes stretching beyond 20,000 feet. That's a lot of responsibility for one man to do. Some sources even say autonomous trains are the way of the future, just like autonomous cars. But again, there's too many problems against it, and there's way too much money that needs to be set to make autonomous trains possible. There's also the question, what would happen if an autonomous train with no engineer hits a person or a car? The robot likely wouldn't see a car or person on their little track circuit, or trip optimizer as they call it. So the idea of crewless trains will likely stay in the form of yard switchers in huge yards, such as Conway, Pennsylvania. On top of that, railroads, like Norfolk Southern, have also reintroduced the idea of tying trains down on the main line, mainly because of crew shortages, lack of room in yards, or more, and in some cases, like here on the Norfolk Southern Harrisburg line, these trains, mainly in the form of unit commodity trains, can sit for hours or days, and while advancements in technology may make runaways a thing of the past, there's still that constant threat of one still occurring. Sometimes, some dispatchers ordered trains to tie down on the side of a freaking mountain.
In your current location, is there any way for you guys to cut away and tie down that power?
gonna happen without a helper on the rear, pal. I don't know where you came from, but you've never been out here. Clearly. I'm just asking if it was possible. That's why I'm asking. No, and you should not be stopping these trains on this mountain. There's a mountain up here.
BNSF, though, while not embracing signalman crews just yet, have still implemented an outrageous attendance procedure that treats the employees like robots, where you must be available for 28 days straight, and if you have to take off work for any reason, such as being sick, family emergency, wedding, whatever, you'd earn points against you, and if you earn enough points, it could lead to a suspension without pay, and with enough suspensions, you'd lose your job. Thankfully, smaller railroads such as the Reading and Northern, Florida East Coast, and the plethora of short lines across the country don't pursue such stupid ideas for various reasons. Mainly because they're run by actual railroaders, not government officials or stockholders. But it still leaves one to wonder. Could a disaster like Lac Megantic be on the horizon once more?
Probably. So, yeah. Yeah. Honestly, it's horrible. Absolutely horrible. Just horrible. Horrible. Honestly, horrid. I mean, why? Just why? What's even the point? Anyways, I'm just gonna go. My throat's pretty dry. I don't know why. Probably because, I haven't drank much water today, so, Okay, bye. Okay, I've added the thing. I've added the thinger. So I thought I'd record like a little thing at the end, I added the thinger. I don't know why. Probably because, I haven't drank much water today, so, Okay, bye. Anyways, okay, bye.